Vampire King accepted arranged marriage until bride's veil dropped and changed everything. Chapter 1. The veil false arrangement had been made in silence, sealed with ink and ancient law, not love. Lady Alara Thornwood had known this truth for 3 months, ever since her uncle signed the contract that would bind her to Houseville Court, the oldest and most feared of the vampire dynasties. She had been told nothing except the date, the time, and that she would wear white. Now she stood in the antechamber of Vilcourt Manor, her hands trembling beneath the weight of her veil. The fabric was heavy, deliberately so thick enough to obscure her face completely, woven with silver thread that caught the candlelight like trap stars. It was a tradition, her uncle had explained. The Vampire King did not see his bride until the vows were spoken. The old laws demanded it. Alara didn't care about old laws. She cared about survival. Her life had shattered 6 months ago when her father's trading company collapsed under accusations of fraud. The scandal had been swift and brutal. Her mother had died of shame within weeks. Her younger sister had been sent to a convent. And Alara, once the most sought-after daughter in the merchant class, had become a liability, a stain on her family's name that only a desperate match could erase. Vampire marriages were rare. They required negotiation, blood oaths, and the approval of the High Council. But they were also final, irrevocable, and for a disgraced family with nothing left to lose, they were a lifeline, or a noose. "They're ready for you," said the steward, a pale man with hollow eyes, who smelled faintly of rosemary and earth. He gestured toward the towering doors of the great hall. Beyond them, she could hear nothing. No music, no murmurs, only silence. Alara forced herself to breathe. Her corset was too tight, her dress too heavy, and the veil made it impossible to see more than shadows and light. She felt like a ghost walking toward her own funeral. The doors opened. The hall stretched before her like the throat of a cathedral, vaulted ceilings, black stone columns, and candles burning in iron sconces that lined the walls. The air was cold, far colder than it should have been in late autumn, and it carried the scent of old incense and something darker, something metallic. At the far end of the hall, beneath a chandelier of wrought iron and crystal, stood the Vampire King. Alara couldn't see his face through the veil, only his silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, motionless as a statue. He wore black, of course he did, and his presence seemed to draw the light from the room, leaving only shadow in his wake. She walked toward him, each step echoing against the stone. There were no guests, no witnesses except the steward and a single priest who stood beside the king, his expression unreadable. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. When she reached the dais, the priest began to speak in a language she didn't recognize, old tongue perhaps, the kind used in blood oaths and binding contracts. She barely heard him. Her heart was pounding too loudly, her breath coming too fast beneath the suffocating veil. The king had not moved, had not spoken. She wondered if he could even see her through the fabric. If it mattered. The priest's voice rose, then fell silent. He gestured to the king. "Speak the vow," the priest said quietly. The king's voice was low, controlled, devoid of warmth. "I bind myself to this union. I claim what has been offered. I vow protection, provision, and the rights of Houseville Court." It sounded like a threat. The priest turned to Alara. "And you, lady of the mortal line, do you accept?" Her throat was dry. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, told herself it didn't matter what words she spoke. But now, standing here in the cold and the dark, she realized how final it truly was. "I accept," she whispered, then removed the veil. Alara's hands moved before her mind could catch up. She lifted the edge of the heavy fabric, pulling it back slowly, feeling the weight of it slide away from her face. The candlelight stung her eyes after so long in shadow. She blinked, focusing on the floor, the walls. "Anything but look at me." The command was quiet, but absolute. She lifted her gaze, and froze. The Vampire King stared at her with an expression she couldn't name, shock, perhaps, or recognition, or something far more dangerous. His face was as beautiful as it was terrible, sharp cheekbones, pale skin that seemed carved from marble, eyes so dark they looked black in the dim light. But it wasn't his beauty that made her breath catch. It was the way he was looking at her, like he knew her, like he had seen her before. "No," he said softly, the word barely audible. The priest frowned. "My lord?" The king didn't answer. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and Alara felt her pulse spike with instinctive fear. He reached out, not to touch her, but to study her face. his gaze tracing every feature as if committing it to memory, or searching for something he'd lost. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice rougher now. "Alara Thornwood," she said, forcing herself not to flinch. "As written in the contract." "Your mother's name?" Her chest tightened. "Catherine." "Why, and her mother?" "I don't," Alara faltered. "I never knew her. She died when my mother was young." The king's expression darkened. He took a step back, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. "Or worse, this marriage," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "cannot proceed." The priest's eyes widened. "My lord, the contract is binding. The blood oath has been. I don't care." The king's voice was cold enough to freeze stone. "Send her back." Alara's stomach dropped. Sent back, returned like damaged goods. Her family would be ruined, completely, irreversibly ruined. And she would be the one who destroyed them. "No," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. The king turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You can't send me back," she continued, her fear crystallizing into something harder. "The contract is sealed. My family's debt is paid. If you refuse me now, you violate the terms." "The council will." "The council," he interrupted, "answers to me. Then they'll call you an oath-breaker." Silence fell like a blade. The king studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. Then, impossibly, he smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his mouth that held no warmth. "You have your mother's fire," he said quietly. "And her face." Alara's blood turned to ice. "What does that mean?" But the vampire king had already turned away, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. "Lock her in the east wing," he said to the steward. "No one enters. No one leaves." And then he was gone, leaving Alara alone in the candlelit hall, with a half-spoken vow and a secret she didn't yet understand. Chapter 2. The East Wing. The East Wing of Vilcourt Manor was not a prison, but it felt like one. Alara had been escorted through a maze of corridors by the hollow-eyed steward, who spoke only to warn her not to wander after dark. Her room was vast and cold, furnished with antiques that looked older than her bloodline, a four-poster bed draped in black velvet, a writing desk carved from ebony, and a fireplace large enough to stand in. The windows were tall and narrow, their glass so thick it distorted the moonlight into something pale and sickly. She was alone, utterly alone. The door had no lock on her side. Alara stood in the center of the room, still wearing her wedding dress, her veil discarded on the floor like a shed skin. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, though the room was freezing, but from the weight of what had just happened. "You have your mother's fire." And her face. What did he mean? Her mother had been a merchant's daughter, nothing more. She had never mentioned vampires, never spoken of House Vilcourt, or blood oaths, or ancient kings who looked at you like they were seeing a ghost. Unless she had lied. Alara pressed her palms against her temples, trying to steady her thoughts. The marriage contract had been her uncle's idea, brokered through intermediaries and sealed without her consent. She had assumed it was desperation, a way to save the family from complete ruin. But now she wondered if there had been something else. Something her uncle had known and kept hidden. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She spun toward the door, her heart lurching. "Who is it?" "May I enter, my lady?" The voice was female, young and tentative. "Not the steward." "Yes," Alara said, though she wasn't sure she wanted company. The door opened to reveal a girl no older than 16, dressed in a simple gray dress, with an apron tied at her waist. She carried a tray laden with bread, cheese, and a carafe of wine. Her eyes were downcast, her movements careful, as if she were afraid of breaking something. "I'm Lisbeth," the girl said quietly. "I've been assigned to attend you." Alara blinked. "Attend me?" "Yes, my lady." His Majesty ordered it. Lisbeth set the tray on the writing desk, her hands trembling slightly. "He said you're to have everything you need. Food, water, clothing. Anything you ask for, except freedom." Lisbeth flinched, but didn't respond. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Alara softened. The girl was clearly terrified, and it wasn't her fault that Alara had been locked away like an inconvenient secret. "I'm sorry. That was unkind. Thank you for bringing this." Lisbeth nodded quickly. "Will you need help with your dress, my lady?" Alara glanced down at the heavy gown, its laces too complex to manage alone. She wanted nothing more than to be free of it, to shed the weight of this failed wedding and everything it represented. "Yes, please." Lisbeth moved behind her, her fingers deft as she began unlacing the corset. The relief was immediate, and Alara exhaled deeply, feeling her ribs expand for the first time in hours. Has he done this before? Alara asked quietly. My lady? The king. Has he refused a bride before? Lisbeth hesitated, her hands pausing on the laces. No, my lady, this is unprecedented. Then why me? I don't know. Lisbeth's voice was barely a whisper, but the household is unsettled. The steward has been whispering with the council envoys all evening. Something about the marriage contract and violations of house law. Alara's stomach tightened. What kind of violations? I don't know. I'm only a maid. The corset came loose, and Alara stepped out of the dress, leaving it pooled on the floor. Lisbeth handed her a dressing gown, soft, dark blue, far more comfortable than the suffocating wedding gown. Alara wrapped it around herself, grateful for the warmth. Lisbeth, she said carefully, what do you know about the king? The girl's eyes widened. My lady, I shouldn't please. I'm trapped here with no answers. I just want to understand. Lisbeth bit her lip, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's been king for over 200 years, longer than any vampire in the High Council. They say he was cursed during the blood wars, that he cannot die, even by sunlight or silver, and that he lost someone, a long time ago. Lost someone? A woman, mortal. They say she looked like. Lisbeth trailed off, her gaze flicking to Alara's face. The air seemed to leave the room. Like me, Alara finished. Lisbeth nodded, her expression pained. I don't know if it's true, but the older servants say he's never taken a bride because he's still mourning her. And tonight, when you lifted your veil, she stopped herself, shaking her head. I shouldn't speak of it. Alara's mind raced. A lost love, a curse, a face from the past walking back into his life in the form of an unwanted bride. It explained the shock in his eyes, the way he had looked at her, like she was both a miracle and a wound reopened, but it didn't explain why her family had been chosen for this contract, or why her mother had never mentioned any connection to House Vilcourt. Thank you, Lisbeth, Alara said quietly. You've been kind. The girl curtsied and hurried toward the door, clearly eager to leave before she said too much. But she paused at the threshold, glancing back. My lady, be careful. The king is not cruel, but he is dangerous, especially when he's grieving. And then she was gone. Alara did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the moon track across the sky, her thoughts tangled in questions she couldn't answer. Somewhere in this vast, silent manor, the vampire king was awake. Vampires did not sleep at night, she knew that much. Was he thinking of her? Or of the woman whose face she wore like a curse? Chapter 3. The forbidden library. Alara woke to gray morning light filtering through the warped glass. She had fallen asleep in the chair by the window sometime before dawn, her neck stiff and her mind still churning with unanswered questions. The fire had died to embers, and the room was cold enough that her breath misted in the air. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in a heavier shawl she found draped over the bed. The manor was silent, the kind of silence that felt deliberate, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Vampires slept during the day, she knew, which meant she had hours before the king would wake, hours to find answers. Alara moved to the door and tested the handle. It opened easily. No lock, no guard. Either they didn't think her foolish enough to wander, or they didn't care if she did. She suspected the former. The steward had been quite clear about not leaving after dark. But daylight was different. Daylight was hers. She dressed quickly in the simplest gown Lisbeth had left folded on the chair, a dark green day dress that required no corset and laced up the front. Then she slipped into the corridor. The east wing was a labyrinth of identical hallways, each one lined with portraits of pale, unsmiling faces. Ancestors, she assumed, or victims. She passed closed doors and empty sitting rooms, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets that smelled of dust and age. Twice she heard movement, soft footsteps, the creak of floorboards, but she saw no one. It wasn't until she reached the main staircase that she found another living soul. Lisbeth appeared at the bottom of the steps, carrying a basket of linens. She froze when she saw Alara, her eyes widening. My lady, you shouldn't be. I need to see the library, Alara said, descending the stairs before the girl could protest. There is a library, isn't there? Lisbeth hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to stop them. Yes, but then show me. His Majesty doesn't allow. His Majesty is asleep, Alara said firmly. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for directions." Lisbeth looked torn, her hands twisting in her apron. "Finally," she sighed. "Down the west corridor. Third door on the left. But if anyone asks, I didn't tell you." "No one will ask," Alara said, though she had no idea if that was true. She found the library exactly where Lisbeth had indicated. The door was unlocked, and when she pushed it open, her breath caught. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, packed with leather-bound volumes in a dozen languages. A spiral staircase led to a second level, and tall windows flooded the space with pale sunlight, real sunlight, unfiltered and warm. It was the first room in this cursed manor that felt alive. Alara stepped inside, her fingers trailing along the spines of books as she passed. History, philosophy, poetry, and an entire section devoted to vampire lore, blood oaths, house genealogies, the laws of the High Council. She pulled one volume from the shelf, flipping through pages filled with names and dates that stretched back centuries. She was looking for one name in particular. Valcourt.it took her nearly an hour of searching before she found it, a genealogy bound in black leather, its pages yellowed with age. She carried it to the reading table beneath the windows and began to skim the entries. The Valcourt line was ancient, stretching back over 1,000 years. Kings and queens, warlords and diplomats, all bound by blood and immortality. And then she found him, Lucien Valcourt, born 1623, crowned 1824, unmarried. The word felt pointed, deliberate, as if the record keeper had wanted to emphasize the absence. She turned the page and found a smaller entry, written in different ink. Note: King Lucien was betrothed in 1847 to Lady Catherine Ashford, mortal daughter of House Ashford. The union was dissolved by mutual consent before completion. Lady Catherine returned to mortal society. No issue. Alara's heart stopped. Catherine, her grandmother's name, her mother's mother. She read the entry again, her hands trembling. Dissolved by mutual consent. But that wasn't how Lisbeth had told the story. The servants said he had lost someone, that he was still mourning. What had happened to Catherine Ashford after she left House Valcourt? And why had her family never spoken of it? "You shouldn't be here." Alara spun around, her heart lurching into her throat. The Vampire King stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim corridor beyond. He wore no coat, only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his dark hair was loose around his shoulders. He looked different in daylight, still dangerous, still impossibly beautiful, but somehow more human. Or perhaps just more tired. "I thought you were asleep," Alara said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I don't sleep well." He stepped into the room, his gaze moving from her to the open book on the table. His expression hardened. "You've been reading. I wanted answers. And did you find them?" She gestured to the genealogy. "Catherine Ashford, my grandmother. She was betrothed to you." Lucien's jaw tightened. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and closed the book with a sharp snap. "That information is private. It's written in your own records. Records you had no permission to access. You locked me in this house without explanation." Alara shot back, her fear giving way to anger. "You looked at me like I was a ghost, refused to complete the marriage, and trapped me here like a prisoner. I think I'm owed an explanation." Lucien stared at her, his dark eyes unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might throw her out of the library or worse. But then his shoulders sagged just slightly, and he turned away. "She was supposed to be my queen," he said quietly. "Catherine, we were betrothed for 3 years. And then, the night before the wedding, she vanished." Alara's breath caught. "Vanished?" "Left a letter. Said she couldn't go through with it. That she was afraid of what immortality would cost her." His voice was hollow, drained of emotion. "I searched for her for decades. By the time I found her, she had married a mortal, had a daughter. She begged me to leave her alone. So you did. I gave her what she wanted. A mortal life, a mortal death." He turned back to face Alara, and for the first time, she saw the grief beneath his cold control. "And now her granddaughter stands in my house, wearing her face, and I'm supposed to pretend it doesn't destroy me." Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but the weight of his confession. Chapter 4. Threads of understanding. Angela didn't return to her room. Instead, she stayed in the library, seated across from Lucien at the reading table as pale afternoon light stretched across the floor. He had not asked her to leave again, and she had not offered. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile, more like the quiet after a storm, when the air still trembled with what had passed. She never told my mother, Alara said finally, breaking the stillness. About you, about any of this. Lucian's fingers traced the edge of the closed genealogy, his expression distant. Catherine made me swear I wouldn't seek out her family. She wanted her daughter raised without the shadow of our world. Then why did my uncle arrange this marriage? I don't know. His voice was flat. The contract came through intermediaries. I never saw your name until the wedding night. If I had known, he stopped himself, jaw tightening. You would have refused. Yes. The word hung between them like a blade. Alara should have felt insulted, rejected. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. At least his refusal hadn't been about her. It had been about the woman whose ghost she carried in her bones. I'm not her, Alara said quietly. Lucian's gaze snapped to hers, dark and searching. I know. Do you? She leaned forward, holding his stare. Because when you look at me, I see her in your eyes. And I don't know if you're seeing me at all. Something flickered across his face, pain, perhaps, or recognition. He looked away first, his hand curling into a fist on the table. You're right, I don't see you. Not yet. The honesty was unexpected, and somehow, it made her trust him more than any reassurance would have. Then help me understand, Alara said. Tell me about her, about what happened, because I'm trapped in the middle of a story. I don't know, and I need to know why. Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then he rose and moved to the window, his silhouette framed against the gray sky. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if each word cost him something. Catherine was brilliant, fearless. She questioned everything: vampire law, house politics, the rituals we took for granted. She made me see my own world differently. He paused. I loved her for it. Alara's chest tightened. What changed? She did. The closer we came to the wedding, the more she withdrew. I thought it was nervousness. Fear of the transformation. Becoming immortal is not painless. His fingers pressed against the window pane. But it was more than that. She was terrified of losing herself, of becoming something she didn't recognize. So she ran. She survived. Lucian turned back to face her. And I spent a century hating her for it. Then another century understanding why she did it. Immortality is a gift to some. To others, it's a slow erasure. Alara thought of her mother, pragmatic, cautious, always choosing the safer path. Had Catherine passed down that fear, that instinct, to run rather than risk transformation? My family is ruined, Alara said quietly. If you send me back, they'll have nothing. The contract was our last hope. I know. Lucian's expression was grim. Your uncle was clever. He knew I wouldn't investigate the bride's lineage if the contract was sealed through proper channels. By the time I saw you, it was too late to refuse without violating house law. Then why did you try? Because I'm selfish. His voice was raw. Because seeing you standing there, wearing her face, speaking with her voice, it felt like cruelty. Like the universe was punishing me for something I couldn't undo. Alara rose slowly, her legs unsteady. She crossed to where he stood, stopping just beyond arm's reach. I'm not a punishment. I'm a person. And I didn't choose this any more than you did. Lucian's gaze held hers, and for the first time, she saw him truly looking at her, not at Catherine's ghost, but at Alara herself. I know, he said again, quieter this time. Then stop trying to send me away. She took a breath, steadying herself. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can survive in your world, but I'd rather try than go back to nothing. You don't know what you're asking. Then teach me. The words came out stronger than she felt. If this marriage is binding, if we're trapped in it whether we like it or not, then at least let me understand what I'm walking into. Lucian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he nodded. 3 days. I'll give you 3 days to learn what it means to live in Houseville Court. If after that, you still want to leave, I'll find a way to break the contract without ruining your family. And if I stay, then you'll be my queen, with all the danger, politics, and bloodshed that entails. Alara's pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. Agreed. Something shifted in Lucian's expression, not quite a smile, but close. You have her courage at least. I have my own courage, Alara corrected. This time, he did smile. It was small, fleeting, but real. Yes, I'm beginning to see that. That evening, Lisbeth brought Alara's dinner to the library rather than her room. The girl seemed surprised. to find the king there, still seated across from Alara, a chessboard now between them. He had been teaching her an ancient variant of the game, one played in vampire courts for centuries. Your move, Lucien said, his tone almost amused. Alara frowned at the board, her knight trapped between his queen and bishop. She moved her rook, sacrificing it to buy time. Lucien raised an eyebrow. Bold, desperate, she corrected. In my experience, they're often the same thing. Lisbeth set the tray down quickly and retreated, casting a curious glance back at them before disappearing into the corridor. Alara barely noticed. She was too focused on the board, on the way Lucien's mind worked, strategic, patient, always 3 moves ahead. You're enjoying this, she said, not looking up. I haven't played chess with anyone in decades. His voice was softer now, less guarded. It's pleasant. Alara glanced at him, surprised by the admission. For the first time, she wondered what it must be like to 100 years of grief, isolation, and carefully maintain control. No wonder he had looked shattered when she lifted her veil. She moved her queen, finally seeing the opening he'd left her. Check. Lucien's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. Well done. They played until the candles burned low and the fire crackled to embers, and when Alara finally returned to her room, she realized something had shifted between them. He was beginning to see her, and she was beginning to see him. Chapter 5. The Blood Oath. Second day began with a lesson in survival. Alara woke to find Lucien waiting in the corridor outside her room. Dressed in black as always, his expression unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. He didn't knock. He simply stood there until she opened the door, still wearing her nightgown and wrapped in a shawl against the cold. Get dressed, he said. Something practical. We're going to the catacombs. The catacombs? Alara's voice was still thick with sleep. Why? Because if you're going to survive in this house, you need to understand what we are. And what we're not. His gaze was steady, serious. I'll wait. She dressed quickly in the simplest gown she could find, lacing her boots tight and braiding her hair back. When she emerged, Lucien handed her a heavy cloak lined with fur. It's cold below, he said. They descended through the manor in silence, passing the grand halls and portrait galleries until they reached a narrow stone staircase that spiraled down into darkness. Lucien carried a lantern, its light casting long shadows on the walls. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the smell of earth and age. To the bottom, they entered a vast underground chamber carved from living rock. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each one marked with names and dates that stretched back centuries. The Volcourt dead. Or rather, the Volcourt transformed vampires who had chosen to enter the long sleep rather than face eternity. This is where we come from, Lucien said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Every vampire in House Volcourt was mortal once. We were soldiers, scholars, artists. We had families, dreams, and then we chose this. Alara moved closer to one of the sarcophagi, reading the inscription. Isabelle Volcourt, born 1456, transformed 1489, entered sleep 1803. Why would they choose to sleep? She asked. Because immortality is not a gift. It's a burden. Lucien set the lantern on a stone pedestal. You watch everyone you love grow old and die. You see, civilizations rise and fall. After a few centuries, some of us grow tired. The sleep is a mercy, not death, but not life either. A pause. Have you ever considered it? Every day for the last 100 years, the honesty startled her. Alara turned to face him, searching his expression in the flickering light. Then why don't you? Responsibility, duty, stubbornness. He paused. And hope, perhaps, that something might change. Like what? I don't know anymore. He moved to the center of the chamber, where a stone altar stood beneath an iron chandelier. But that's not why we're here. I brought you down here because you need to understand the rules, the laws that govern us. Alara approached the altar, noting the intricate carvings that covered its surface, symbols she didn't recognize, intertwined with words in a language she couldn't read. Blood oaths, Lucien said, tracing one of the symbols with his finger. Every vampire is bound by them. We cannot feed without consent. We cannot transform without mutual agreement. We cannot break a sworn oath without losing our power, sometimes our lives. What happens if you break one? The magic that sustains us unravels. We age, we weaken. Eventually, we die. He met her gaze. It's the only real law we have. Everything else is politics and tradition. But blood oaths are absolute. Alara's throat tightened. Is our marriage a blood oath? Yes and no. Lucien's expression darkened. The contract your uncle signed was binding under mortal law. But it becomes a blood oath only if we both consent willingly, without coercion. Otherwise, it's just words on paper. Then why can't you just tear up the contract? Because your uncle leveraged your family's debt against Houseville Court's honor. If I refuse you now, the High Council will question my authority. They'll see it as weakness. And weakness invites challenge. So you're trapped. We both are. He turned away from the altar, his shoulders tense. Unless we find another way. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. What kind of way? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, there's a clause in vampire marriage law. If the mortal bride willingly drinks the blood of her intended and survives 3 nights without transformation, the bond is considered tested, proven. The council cannot challenge it. And if she doesn't survive, then she dies, or transforms against her will. His voice was flat. It's an old law, rarely invoked. And I would never ask it of you. But it would solve the problem. At too high a cost. Alara stared at the altar, her mind racing. She thought of her family, her sister in the convent, her uncle's desperate face when he'd told her about the contract. She thought of Catherine, who had run rather than face transformation. And she thought of Lucien, standing in this tomb of sleeping vampires, alone for centuries. What are the risks? She asked quietly. Lucien's head snapped toward her. No, tell me. Alara, tell me. He exhaled sharply, his hands curling into fists. Vampire blood is toxic to mortals. In small amounts, it can heal wounds, grant temporary strength. But drinking it directly is dangerous. Your body will fight it. You'll have fever, visions, pain. Most mortals don't survive the first night, but some do. Some. Very few. And if I survive all 3 nights, then you'll be bound to me by blood. Not transformed, but connected. You'll feel what I feel. Know when I'm near. And the council will have no grounds to question our union. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. It was insane, reckless, but so was everything else about this cursed marriage. And you wouldn't have to send me back, she said. That's not a reason to risk your life. Maybe not. She met his gaze. Her voice steady despite her fear. But keeping my family from ruin is. Lucien stared at her, his expression torn between anger and something that looked almost like admiration. You don't know what you're asking. Then explain it to me. All of it. Don't hide the truth because you think I'm too fragile to hear it. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. But then he nodded slowly, his jaw tight. 3 nights, he said. 3 drops of blood, taken at midnight. You'll be monitored every moment. If your body starts to fail, we stop immediately. Do you understand? Yes. And you're certain? Alara thought of her mother, dead from shame. Her sister, locked away from the world. Her own future, balanced on the edge of a knife. I'm certain. Lucien's eyes darkened with something she couldn't name. Then we begin tonight. Chapter 6. The first night. Midnight found Alara in the library, seated by the fire, with Lucien across from her. The room felt smaller now, more intimate, despite its vast shelves and towering windows. Lisbeth had been dismissed hours ago. The rest of the household slept or pretended to. Only the 2 of them remained awake, suspended in the quiet hours between day and night. Alara's hands were steady, but her pulse was not. Lucien had been silent since they'd returned from the catacombs. He'd given her the afternoon to reconsider, to change her mind. But she hadn't. And now the clock on the mantel chimed 12 times, each tone echoing through the stillness like a countdown. Last chance, Lucien said, his voice low. You can still walk away. I won't. He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat and withdrew a small silver knife, its blade no longer than her palm. The metal caught the firelight, gleaming like captured moonlight. Your wrist, he said. Alara extended her hand, surprised by how calm she felt. Perhaps it was shock. Or perhaps some part of her had already accepted what came next. Lucien took her wrist gently, his fingers cool against her skin. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if he were holding something fragile. "This will hurt," he said. "Not the cut. The blood. I understand." He pressed the blade to the inside of his own wrist first, drawing it across in one smooth motion. Dark blood welled immediately, almost black in the dim light. He held his wrist over hers, letting 3 drops fall onto her skin before the wound sealed itself, healing in seconds. Alara watched, fascinated, despite her fear. The blood didn't soak into her skin, it sat there, glistening, as if waiting. "Now," Lucien said quietly, "you have to take it willingly. Say yes, yes," Alara whispered. The moment the word left her lips, the blood on her wrist began to move. It slid across her skin like liquid silver, seeking entry. And then it burned. Alara gasped, her free hand gripping the arm of the chair. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, not in her wrist, but everywhere. Her veins felt like they were filled with fire, her blood boiling beneath her skin. She tried to breathe and couldn't, her lungs refusing to expand. "Look at me." Lucien's voice cut through the haze of pain. He was kneeling in front of her now, his hands framing her face, forcing her to focus on his eyes. "Breathe, Alara, slowly, in and out." She tried, failed, tried again. A thin stream of air entered her lungs, then another. The burning didn't stop, but it became manageable barely. "Good," Lucien murmured. "Stay with me. Don't let it take you under." Alara's vision swam. The library seemed to tilt and spin, the firelight fragmenting into 1,000 dancing sparks. She could feel her heartbeat in her skull, a frantic drumming that made her teeth ache. "How long?" She managed to gasp. "An hour. Maybe less." His thumbs brushed her cheeks, grounding her. "I'm not leaving. I'll be right here." The hour stretched into eternity. Alara's body rebelled against the foreign presence in her blood. She shook violently, her muscles seizing and releasing in waves. Sweat soaked through her dress despite the cold, and the visions came fractured images that made no sense. A woman with Catherine's face laughing in a garden, a battlefield soaked in blood. Lucien, younger somehow, kneeling beside a grave. "Not real," Lucien's voice said from somewhere far away. "Your mind is trying to make sense of what it's feeling. Don't trust it." But the visions felt real, more real than the library, than the fire, than anything solid. Alara saw herself standing in a vast hall, surrounded by pale figures with dark eyes. They were watching her, judging her, waiting for her to fail. "I see them," she whispered. "See who?" "The council. They're here." Lucien's expression tightened. "You're hallucinating. There's no one here but us. They're waiting for me to die." "You're not going to die." His voice was fierce now, almost angry. "Do you hear me? I won't let you." Alara wanted to believe him. But the fire in her veins was growing stronger, hotter, and she could feel her body starting to shut down. Her heartbeat was slowing, each pulse weaker than the last. "Lucien," she breathed. "I can't." "Yes, you can." He pulled her forward, wrapping his arms around her, holding her against his chest. His voice was in her ear, steady and unyielding. "You're stronger than this. Stronger than Catherine was. Fight it." Something in his words cut through the fog. Stronger than Catherine. She wasn't her grandmother. She wasn't running. She was here, in this moment, choosing to endure. Alara focused on that, on the choice, on the fact that she had said yes and meant it. Slowly, impossibly, the burning began to recede, her heartbeat steadied, her breathing evened. The visions faded to shadows, then to nothing. And when she finally opened her eyes, she found herself still in Lucien's arms, his hand cradling the back of her head. His body tense as wire. "It's over," she whispered. Lucien pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes searching her face. Relief flickered across his expression, quickly hidden. "The first night is over. You still have to more." "I know." Alara's voice was hoarse, her throat raw from screaming. Had she been screaming? She couldn't remember. "But I survived." "You did." Something in his tone was different, warmer. Not many mortals would have. Not many mortals are desperate enough to try. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "True." He helped her to her feet, though her legs were unsteady and her head still spun. Lisbeth appeared as if summoned. Perhaps she had been waiting just outside, and together they guided Alara back to her room. The girl stripped away her sweat-soaked dress and helped her into a clean nightgown. then tucked her into bed with warm blankets and a pot of tea that smelled of honey and herbs. Lucien lingered in the doorway, watching. Rest, he said. You'll need your strength for tomorrow night. Will it be worse? Elara asked, already half asleep. Yes, she should have been afraid. But exhaustion pulled her under before fear could take root. When she woke hours later, sunlight streaming through the windows, she found a note on her bedside table. The handwriting was elegant, precise. You were brave. Elara folded the note carefully and pressed it against her chest, her heart beating steady and strong. 1 night down, 2 to go. Chapter 7. Shadows at the Gadielera spent the second day in a fog of exhaustion and nervous anticipation. Her body ached as though she'd been thrown from a horse, every muscle tender and protesting. Lisbeth brought her breakfast in bed porridge with honey, fresh bread, tea, but Elara could barely eat. Her stomach was too tight, her thoughts too scattered. She knew what was coming. The second night would be worse. By afternoon, she forced herself out of bed and dressed. Staying in her room felt like surrender, and she refused to give in to fear. She found Lucien in his study, a room she hadn't seen before, lined with maps and ledgers and correspondence sealed with wax. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. You should be resting. I've rested enough. Elara lowered herself into the chair across from his desk, wincing slightly. What are you working on? Lucien hesitated, then gestured to the papers spread before him. Reports from the border estates. There's been movement, scouts from House Corvinus crossing into our territory. Corvinus? The name meant nothing to her. A rival house. Old enemies. His jaw tightened. They've been quiet for decades. This is unusual. Do you think they know about me? I think they know something. He set down his pen, his expression grim. The marriage contract was supposed to be private, but nothing stays secret long in vampire politics. If Corvinus suspects weakness, if they think I've made a poor alliance, they'll test us. Test us how? Raids, provocations, challenges to my authority. He met her gaze. Or they'll try to eliminate you before the bond is complete. Elara's blood ran cold. You think they'll come here? Not yet, but soon. Lucien leaned back in his chair, studying her. Which is why you need to survive the next 2 nights. A completed blood bond will prove our union to the council and make you untouchable under house law. And if I don't survive, then Corvinus will claim I chose poorly, that I've grown weak, sentimental. They'll move against House Valcourt with the council's tacit approval. The weight of it settled over Elara like a shroud. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for his position, his house, his survival. No pressure, she said dryly. Lucien's mouth quirked almost a smile. You're handling this better than I expected. I'm terrified, Elara admitted, but I'm also angry. At my uncle for selling me. At the council for their games. At the whole cursed system. Good. Lucien's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. Anger will keep you alive tonight. Fear makes you hesitate. Anger makes you fight. Midnight came too quickly. This time, they met in Lucien's chambers, a stark room dominated by a massive bed draped in dark velvet and a fireplace large enough to stand in. The walls were bare stone, the windows shuttered against the night. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a fortress. Elara stood near the fire, trying to keep her hands from shaking. She had changed into a simple shift, knowing she would sweat through anything heavier. Her hair was loose, her feet bare. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Lucien entered silently, closing the door behind him. He had discarded his coat, wearing only black trousers and a white shirt open at the throat. He looked almost human in the firelight until you saw his eyes. Ready? He asked. No, Elara forced herself to meet his gaze. But do it anyway. He crossed to her, the silver knife already in his hand. This time, when he cut his wrist, the blood seemed darker, thicker. He held it over her upturned palm, letting 3 drops fall. Say yes, he murmured. Yes. The second burning was immediate and catastrophic. Elara's knees buckled. Lucien caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her easily and carrying her to the bed. He laid her down gently, then sat beside her, one hand gripping hers as her body convulsed. This time was different. Worse. The fire didn't just burn, it consumed. Elara felt her bones turning to ash, her blood evaporating, her skin peeling away layer by layer. She screamed, or thought she did. Sound lost all meaning in the roaring inferno that filled her skull. Stay with me, Lucien's voice commanded, cutting through the chaos. Elara, listen to my voice. but she couldn't. The visions were stronger now, more vivid. She saw Catherine standing at the altar, her face white with terror. She saw Lucien reaching for her, and Catherine stepping back, shaking her head. I can't do this. She was afraid, Alara gasped. She saw this. She knew. Lucien agreed, his voice tight. And she chose to run. I don't blame her, neither do I. Not anymore. His hand tightened on hers. But you're not her. You're still here. The visions shifted. Now Alara saw soldiers in armor storming a castle, saw Lucien fighting with inhuman speed, saw bodies piling at his feet. So much death, so much blood. What did you do? She whispered. What I had to. His voice was hollow. I was a king. I protected my people, even when it cost me everything. The fire spread to her heart. Alara arched off the bed, her back bowing, her scream tearing through the room. This was it. This was where she died. She could feel her heart stuttering, failing, her body giving up, and then Lucien did something she didn't expect. He bit his own wrist deep this time, drawing fresh blood and pressed it to her lips. Drink, he commanded. You said 3 drops, drink, damn you. Alara obeyed without thinking. The blood touched her tongue, metallic and cold, and the effect was instantaneous. The burning didn't stop, but it changed, became bearable almost. Her heart steadied, finding its rhythm again. The visions receded just enough for her to breathe. That's cheating, she managed to gasp. I don't care. Lucien's face was above hers, his expression fierce. I won't let you die for a ritual. The council can go to hell. Despite everything, Alara laughed. It came out as a broken, ragged sound, but it was real. And somehow, it anchored her. She held onto that laugh, that moment of absurdity, as the second hour crawled past. Lucien stayed beside her the entire time, his hand never leaving hers, his voice steady as he talked her through each wave of pain. He told her about the stars, how they looked different after 200 years. About the first time he'd seen the ocean. About a dog he'd loved as a mortal boy. Before everything changed, and slowly, impossibly, Alara survived. When the burning finally faded, leaving only exhaustion in its wake, she found herself curled against Lucien's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, slow, steady, ancient. One more night, he murmured into her hair. One more, she agreed, but outside, in the darkness beyond the shuttered windows, something moved. A shadow detached from the trees, and in the distance, a wolf howled. Chapter 8. The Seagalera woke to chaos. Shouting echoed through the halls, followed by the crash of breaking glass and the metallic clang of steel on stone. She bolted upright in bed, her head still foggy from the second night's ordeal. Pale dawn light filtered through the shutters, which meant Lucien should have been asleep. All vampires were vulnerable during daylight hours, but the sounds of violence said otherwise. She threw on her dressing gown and stumbled to the door, flinging it open. Lisbeth stood in the corridor, her face white with terror, clutching a fireplace poker like a weapon. My lady, you need to stay inside. What's happening? House Corvinus. They've breached the gates. Alara's heart plummeted. In daylight? They brought mortals, mercenaries. Lisbeth's voice shook. They're trying to reach the king's chambers before sunset. If they kill him while he's sleeping. Alara didn't wait to hear more. She pushed past Lisbeth and ran down the corridor, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. She had no weapon, no plan, only the desperate knowledge that Lucien was defenseless and the enemy was already inside. The manor was in disarray. Servants fled past her, carrying whatever valuables they could grab. Somewhere below, she heard the clash of swords and men shouting in languages she didn't recognize. The household guard, what little existed during the day, was clearly overwhelmed. She reached Lucien's chambers and threw open the door. He lay motionless on the bed, his body slack in the unnatural stillness of vampire day sleep. His chest barely rose and fell. In this state, he was utterly vulnerable, couldn't wake, couldn't defend himself, couldn't even sense danger approaching, and footsteps were thundering up the stairs. Alara's mind raced. She couldn't fight trained mercenaries, but she could buy time. She slammed the door shut and threw the heavy iron bolt into place. Then she dragged the writing desk across the floor, wedging it against the door. A chair followed, then a trunk from the foot of the bed. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it was something. The footsteps reached the corridor outside. Someone tested the door, then swore viciously, "Break it down." The first blow shook the entire frame. Wood splintered. The bolt groaned but held. Alara looked around desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. Her eyes landed on the fireplace, the iron poker, the heavy andirons. She grabbed the poker, her hands slick with sweat, and positioned herself between the door and Lucien's sleeping form. The second blow cracked the door. The third sent splinters flying across the room. On the fourth blow, the bolt gave way. The door crashed open, slamming into the makeshift barricade. Men poured through the gap, 3 of them, armed with swords and crossbows, their faces hard and professional. The leader spotted Alara and laughed. The mortal bride. Even better. Corvinus will pay extra for you. Over my dead body, Alara said, raising the poker with shaking hands. That can be arranged. He advanced, his sword gleaming in the pale light. Alara swung the poker with all her strength. He blocked it easily, metal ringing against metal, and backhanded her across the face. She stumbled, stars exploding across her vision, and fell hard against the stone floor. Pain burst through her skull. Blood filled her mouth. Through blurred vision, she saw the mercenary step past her, raising his sword above Lucien's throat. No, Alara screamed. She didn't think. She launched herself at the man's legs, grabbing him around the knees with desperate strength. He cursed and staggered, his sword swing going wide, burying itself in the mattress instead of Lucien's neck. The mercenary kicked her in the ribs, and Alara's breath left in a rush. But she didn't let go. She held on with everything she had, screaming wordlessly, buying seconds, buying time for what? Lucien couldn't wake. The guards were overwhelmed. She was going to die here, and so was he, and the room exploded with movement. Lucien's eyes snapped open, not the gradual awakening of sleep, but instant, absolute consciousness. His hand shot out, catching the mercenary's wrist before the man could pull his sword free. Then Lucien moved. It was too fast for Alara to follow. One moment the mercenary was standing. The next, he was on the floor, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, dead. Before his body finished falling, Lucien rose from the bed like something unleashed. His eyes were black, completely black, without white or iris. His fangs were extended, and when he smiled, it was the smile of a predator who had just been given permission to hunt. You woke me, he said quietly. His voice was different, layered, ancient, terrifying. You shouldn't have done that. The second mercenary fired his crossbow. The bolt caught Lucien in the shoulder, driving deep. He didn't even flinch. He pulled it out slowly, deliberately, and dropped it on the floor. Iron, he observed. Clever, not clever enough. He crossed the distance between them in a blur. The mercenary didn't have time to scream. The third man broke and ran. He made it 3 steps before Lucien caught him by the throat and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack stone. How many? Lucien demanded. The mercenary choked, his face purpling. T20. Downstairs, holding the west wing, Lucien's hand tightened. The man's words cut off in a wet gurgle. Then Lucien dropped him and turned to Alara. The blackness was already fading from his eyes, humanity returning in slow increments. He crouched beside her, his hands gentle as they checked her injuries, the split lip, the bruising ribs, the knot forming on her temple. You woke me, he said again, softer this time. Day sleep should be unbreakable. You were going to die, Alara managed, wincing as she spoke. So you threw yourself at armed mercenaries. His voice held something between exasperation and awe. You're insane. I'm stubborn. That too. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Can you walk? I think so. Good, because we're not done yet. He moved to the window and threw open the shutters. Sunlight poured in, direct, blazing sunlight that should have burned him to ash. But Lucien stood in it, unharmed, his face tilted toward the light. The blood bond, Alara breathed. It's protecting you. Tonight's, Lucien confirmed. Not complete, but enough. Your mortality is lending me daylight. He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw genuine fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. Which means you've made yourself a target. Corvinus will want you dead more than ever. Below, the sounds of fighting intensified. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Lucien grabbed a sword from one of the dead mercenaries and handed Alara a dagger. Stay close to me. Don't try to be a hero again. What are we doing? His smile was sharp and cold. Taking back my house. Chapter 9. Blood and Reckoning. The West Wing was a battlefield. Lucien moved through the corridors like a force of nature, his sword flashing in the sunlight that now seemed to follow him through the manor. Alara stayed close behind, the dagger clutched in her trembling hand, her ribs screaming with every breath. The mercenaries had fortified themselves in the main hall, using overturned furniture and tapestries as barricades. They had expected to face sleeping vampires and frightened servants. They hadn't expected a vampire king who could walk in daylight with a mortal bride at his side. Vilcourt, one of them shouted, his voice edged with panic. You can't be awake, the sun knew rules, Lucien said coldly. He stepped into a shaft of direct sunlight, streaming through a shattered window, letting it illuminate him like a spotlight. Shall we discuss them? Or would you prefer to run? Half of them ran. The others were either braver or more desperate. They charged, swords drawn, crossbows aimed. Lucien met them head-on. His movements were surgical, precise, no wasted motion, no hesitation. He disarmed one man, broke another's sword arm, and sent a third crashing through a window in the span of seconds. Alara pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way. But one mercenary broke free from the melee and lunged toward her, his dagger aimed at her throat. Instinct took over. Alara ducked under his swing and drove her own dagger upward, catching him in the shoulder. He howled and stumbled back, blood spreading across his shirt. Before he could recover, Lucien was there, catching the man by the collar and throwing him across the room like a ragdoll. I said stay close, Lucien snapped, his eyes blazing. He came at me. Then stay closer. The remaining mercenaries retreated toward the main doors, realizing they were outmatched. But before they could escape, the doors burst open from the outside. More men poured in, but these were the crimson and black of House Vilcourt. The household guard finally rallied, and at their head was someone Alara hadn't seen before, a tall woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, dressed in fighting leathers and carrying twin short swords. About time. Margot, Lucien said dryly. I was securing the perimeter. Your Majesty. The woman's gaze swept the room, taking in the carnage with professional detachment. Then her eyes landed on Alara, and one eyebrow arched. The bride survived the night. Impressive. 2 nights, Lucien corrected. And she saved my life. Margot's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. Then she's earned her place. She turned to the guards. Clear the house. I want every Corvinus mercenary found and questioned. The survivors go to the dungeons. The guards moved with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the remaining mercenaries were either captured or dead. The servants began emerging from hiding, shocked and shaken, but alive. Alara's legs finally gave out. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, her body shaking with delayed shock. Lucien was beside her instantly, kneeling, his hands checking her injuries again. You're bleeding, he said, touching the cut on her temple where the mercenary had struck her. I'm fine. You're not. His jaw tightened. You should have stayed in your room. So you could die alone? Alara met his gaze, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. I didn't survive 2 nights of blood bond just to let mercenaries murder you in your sleep. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, gratitude, something deeper she couldn't name. You're going to get yourself killed. Not today. Margot approached, wiping blood from her swords. Corvinus sent 20 men. We've captured 12, killed 6. 2 escaped. Her expression hardened. This was a statement, Your Majesty. They wanted to prove you're vulnerable. They proved the opposite, Lucien said coldly. They proved I can defend my house even in daylight, and that my bride is willing to die protecting it. Margot's gaze slid to Alara again, reassessing. 1 more night to complete the bond? Yes. Then Corvinus will strike again before midnight. They can't afford to let her survive the 3rd night. She sheathed her swords. I'll double the guard. Set wards on all entrances. But if they're desperate enough, they'll find a way in. Let them try, Lucien said softly. And the menace in his voice made even Margot pause. They retreated to the library, the safest room in the manor, with only 1 entrance, and windows too high to reach without a ladder. Margot posted guards outside while Lisbeth brought water, bandages, and food that Alara couldn't bring herself to eat. Lucien tended to her injuries himself, cleaning the cut on her temple with surprising gentleness. His hands were steady, but his expression was troubled. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Thrown yourself at armed men. You could have been killed. So could you. I've lived 200 years. You've barely lived 20, which is exactly why my life mattered more in that moment. Alara caught his hand, stopping his movements. You were helpless. I wasn't. It was the only choice that made sense. Lucien stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Catherine would have run. I'm not Catherine. No, his voice was rough. You're not. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In a few hours, midnight would come. The third night, the final test. Are you afraid? Lucien asked. Alara considered lying, but she was too tired to raw. Terrified. The third night is the worst. The blood will try to change you completely. Your body will fight it harder than before because it knows this is the end, transformation or death, and you'll be there, every moment. His hand tightened on hers. I won't let you die, Alara, even if it means breaking the ritual. Even if it means the council questions our bond. No, Alara's voice was firm. We finish this, properly, no shortcuts, no cheating. Because if we don't, Corvinus wins. They'll claim you're weak, that I'm weak, and they'll tear your house apart. I don't care about the house if you're dead. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Alara's breath caught. She studied his face, the sharp lines, the ancient eyes, the carefully controlled expression that was cracking at the edges. When had this stopped being about survival? When had it become about him? You will care, she said softly. Tomorrow, when I'm alive and the bond is complete, you'll care. So let me do this. Let me finish it. Lucien's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. You're too brave for your own good. I learned from you. He almost smiled. Almost. Then the bells began to toll, the warning bells, signaling sunset. The vampires of House Volcourt were waking, and somewhere beyond the gates, House Corvinus was preparing for one final strike. Alara stood, her body, protesting every movement. We should prepare, yes. Lucien rose with her, his hand still holding hers. Whatever happens tonight, thank you. For not running. For standing with me. Where else would I go? Alara asked, and realized with startling clarity that she meant it. This manor, this cursed vampire king, this impossible bond, somehow, it had become hers, and she would fight like hell to keep it. Chapter 10. The third night. Midnight arrived. Like a held breath finally released, Alara stood in Lucien's chambers once more, but this time the room was fortified. Margot had stationed guards at every entrance, placed iron wards on the windows, and sealed the door with a blood lock that only Lucien could open. The fireplace roared, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. They were as safe as they could be. But safety was relative when enemies prowled outside and poison coursed through her veins. Lucien stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the moonlight. He had been silent since sunset, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Alara recognized the signs now. He was preparing himself for what came next, for the possibility that she might not survive. Lucien, she said softly. He turned, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke her. I can't do this. I can't watch you die. You won't. Alara crossed to him, taking his cold hands in her warm ones. I've survived 2 nights. I'll survive the third. The third is different. The blood doesn't just burn, it transforms. It will try to remake you into something immortal. And if your body rejects it completely, then you'll stop it. Like you did before. She squeezed his hands. I trust you. You shouldn't, but I do. She lifted his hand to her chest, pressing it over her heart. Feel that? I'm still here. Still human. Still fighting. And I'm not going to stop now. Lucien's eyes closed, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. You terrify me, he whispered. I've faced armies, survived wars, ruled for 2 centuries. And one mortal woman with too much courage and not enough sense terrifies me. Good, Alara said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Then we're even. He pulled back, his expression shifting to something harder, more resolved. If we do this, if you survive, the bond will be permanent. You'll be tied to me for the rest of your mortal life. You'll feel what I feel, know when I'm near, share in my strength and my weaknesses. There's no going back. I know. And you still want this? Alara thought of her old life, the scandal, the shame, the slow suffocation of a world that had already written her off. Then she thought of the past 3 days, the terror and the trust, the blood and the honesty, the way Lucien looked at her like she was more than just a ghost of the past. I want this, she said firmly. I want you. Something in Lucien's expression cracked open. For a moment, he looked almost human, vulnerable and hopeful and afraid. Then he reached for the silver knife. Then let's finish it. The third cut was deeper. Lucien's blood fell onto Elara's outstretched palm, 3 drops. Dark as sin, gleaming like molten obsidian in the firelight. She stared at them, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her skull. "Say yes," Lucien murmured. His voice rough. "Yes." Elara breathed. The blood moved. This time, it didn't burn, it invaded. Elara felt it sink into her skin, her veins, her bones, spreading like roots through every part of her. Her body seized, muscles locking rigid as the transformation began in earnest. She couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but endure as her mortality waged war against immortality. Lucien caught her as she collapsed, lifting her onto the bed, his hands framing her face. "Look at me. Stay with me. Don't let it take you." But the visions were already pulling her under. She saw everything. Catherine, young and terrified, standing at this same altar, feeling this same agony. Lucien, younger too, holding her hand and begging her to hold on. And Catherine's face twisted in fear and refusal, as she pushed him away and ran. "I can't become a monster. I won't." Elara felt her grandmother's terror as if it were her own. The fear of losing herself, of becoming something alien and cold. The desperate need to stay human, to stay real, even if it meant abandoning the man she loved. But Elara wasn't Catherine. She pushed back against the visions, against the fear, and opened her eyes. Lucien's face swam into focus above her, his expression raw with worry. "I'm not her," Elara gasped. "I'm not running." "I know," Lucien said fiercely. "You're stronger, braver." His words cut off as Elara convulsed again. This time, the pain was different, sharper, more focused. She could feel her body making a choice: transform or die, and for one terrible moment, she felt herself slipping toward the edge, toward the darkness that promised peace and oblivion. It would be so easy to let go, to stop fighting. Then Lucien's voice cut through the fog. "Don't you dare leave me, not now, not after everything." His hands tightened on her face, his forehead pressing against hers. "I've been alone for 178 years. I've mourned, I've survived, I've ruled an empire of shadows, but I've never truly lived. Not until you." Elara's eyes flew open. "Lucien, stay," he whispered. "Please, stay with me." The word "please" shattered something inside her. A vampire king, ancient and powerful, begging a mortal woman to live. For him, for them. Elara grabbed onto that plea like a lifeline. She focused on Lucien's voice, his touch, the steady rhythm of his breathing. She let it anchor her as the transformation reached its peak, and then stopped. The burning faded, the visions dissolved, and Elara's body settled into something new. Not fully human, not vampire, but something in between. A bridge between two worlds. She gasped, air flooding her lungs, and opened her eyes. Lucien stared at her, disbelief and hope warring on his face. "Elara? I'm here," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, her body weak, but she was alive. "I'm still here." A sound escaped Lucien, half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she couldn't breathe. But she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and held on just as fiercely. "3 nights, he murmured into her hair. "You survived 3 nights. The bond is complete." Elara could feel it now, a golden thread connecting her to him, thrumming with life and power. She could sense his relief, his joy, his carefully guarded love. And she knew somehow that he could feel hers too. "What happens now?" she asked. Lucien pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Now we face the council, together, and we show them that House Volcourt is stronger than ever, and Corvinus." His smile was sharp and cold. "Let them come. They'll find I'm not the only one worth fearing anymore." Elara smiled back, fierce and unafraid. "No, they won't.